we're going to go over file sharing and permissions, and from there we'll move on to print services. Next, we're going to quickly go over print services, which allows you to share network printers with users and deploy them in a way where they don't need to add a printer individually onto their computer. The basics of it is that you set up a printer within your network and you set up Windows Server to be a print server, and that provides the drivers and the print queue on the server to be available for users to use. So first we need to install that role. So we go back to Add Roles and Features, and this is a role installation. So we'll go to Server Roles and we'll select Print and Document Services. We'll check that. It lets us know that it's also going to install the administration tools for that role. So we'll click Add Features. It gives us a little overview of print and document services and what that does. And there's also some other features that come along with that. We can do a distributed scan, we can do internet printing, LPD. Right now we're just going to do a basic print server. We'll go ahead and click Install, and the installation will start. Once the installation is finished, we can click Close, and you'll see that the print services role has been installed. So now to access the tool for print management, we can go up to Tools and scroll down to Print Management. In Print Management, in the snap-in, we'll see that we have some filters available to view what we have installed. So under All Printers, we'll see that we have the built-in XPS document writer, and under Drivers, we'll see that we have some drivers available to use. So what we need to do is we need to install a network printer, and then we're going to check to make sure that a printer is available to use on the network for users. So what we'll do is we'll go to Print Servers. We only have the one, so we'll expand our server. And then we'll go down to Printers. Now this is a similar view to what we did above, but within this menu we can right-click and select Add Printer. Now if you've ever installed a network printer on Windows or Windows 7, 8, 10, it's fairly simple. What we can do is do it by IP address, since I have a static IP address set up on my printer. But you can also search for the network printer, use an existing port if it's a attached printer directly to the server, or we could manually create a new port. We're going to do that by the IP address since I have a static IP on my printer. So we'll type in the IP address of our printer. It's going to contact the printer and try to grab the most relevant drivers for that printer. Looks like it found the printer, and we're going to make sure that we turn on sharing. Now what that does is it makes that printer available on the network for other people to use. We'll give it a friendly name, and we probably want to fill in the location. Let's say that this printer is at the headquarters and it's at the front office. We can also add a comment that users will see if they open up the Properties tab of that printer. So we'll select Next. It'll give us a summary of our settings, and it will begin to install the printer. Once the printer installation has succeeded, we could actually go ahead and try to print a test page just to make sure that the server's connection to the printer is working. Or we can add another printer if we have multiples that we need to add. But we'll go ahead and click Finish. And we'll see that in the queue, this printer is ready to print. Now there are multiple options in deploying this printer in a way that the users can access it. We could list it in the directory, in Active Directory, so that when a user goes to install a printer, they can look it up and install it themselves. Or we could deploy that printer with group policy. It's going to be different in every case. If you have a printer that everybody in the company uses or everybody in the building uses, it might be appropriate to use group policy so that all the people in the business have access to that printer already installed, ready for them, even new users that might not be familiar with installing a printer. If your users are fairly familiar with installing printers over the network, or you can teach them how to do that, it's a lot simpler to list it in the directory. So we're going to do both so that we get a good handle on how to do each type of deployment. So listing in the directory is quite simple. All we do is right-click the printer and select List in Directory. Now that printer is listed in the directory, and if a user wanted to install it, they would simply open up Devices and Printers on their PC, select Add a Printer, and that printer would be listed. If they can't find it, or if it's not showing up, we can select Find a Printer in the directory, and we'll see that our printer is listed, along with the location and the model. Now, if we want to deploy a printer over group policy, it's a little more complicated. We'll right-click our printer and select Deploy with Group Policy. Now, in order for us to be able to deploy a printer over group policy, we need to have a group policy object in place for that policy to reside. Now, I could go ahead and manually configure that. I could go into group policy and set up the policy and deploy the printer by manually selecting all of those things. But this wizard within Print Management allows me to create a group policy automatically without having to do it all manually. So what we'll do is we'll click Browse, and if I already had a policy that I wanted to add this printer to, I could just go ahead and select it, and the wizard would take care of adding those settings. But I don't have a policy for printing yet, so I'm going to create one. I'm going to create one within the headquarters OU, and it might be practical to do it for each OU because there might be different printers at each location. So I'll double-click the headquarters OU, and now within that I'm going to create a new group policy object. And I'm simply going to name that printers. So with the printers policy that we just created, we'll click OK. And we'll deploy this printer connection to the following, either per user or per machine. Do we want this printer to be available for all of the users within the headquarters, or do we want it to be available for all of the computers? Well, it really doesn't matter, because more than likely all of the computers that are in the headquarters OU are going to be used by users within that OU. You can customize that. If you have a user coming from a different OU using a computer at a different location, you might want to make it per machine. That way, when they use a computer at that OU, they automatically have the printer in that OU based on this group policy. So we can configure that independently if we want to. I'm going to do it per user because I want this printer to be available only to the people who normally work within headquarters. But I could also do per machine if I wanted. So once I have that selected, I'll click Add. And now I have the printer name, the GPO that it's going to apply to, and it's going to go per user. I'll go ahead and click OK. Printer deployment or removal operation succeeded, and I can see the details on that if I need to. And just to make sure that I've deployed it okay, I can go back into Server Manager and open up Group Policy Management under Tools. And I can go into the headquarters and select Printers. And if I go under Settings, I can see my printer connection there. So when that user logs in, if they belong to the HQ OU, they're going to automatically get that printer connection. One thing to consider when you're setting up a print server is that when users go to install a printer that they don't have drivers for, the server will try to advertise drivers to that computer, and the user will have the choice to accept the drivers that the server is presenting to their computer. The one thing that we have to keep in mind is, in order to install drivers, that user must be an administrator. So there are two options of dealing with that issue. You can either simply have the user get in touch with a network administrator and have them enter their credentials to install the drivers. And there's also a policy in group policy that allows users to install printers on their own without administrative credentials. That's a little advanced in terms of setting that up, but you want to keep in mind that the user will need to have the rights to install drivers on their machine in order to start printing.